declare itself stable across the capacities of everyone in this room. So if one project got disinterested or went off piste, there would still be other people to back that coin, still interested in producing collaborative finance tools. Now, that's still quite a weak stable coin because this is just a small community. Imagine then you have a larger network of other people working in different, so that's the core recursive tool, but it's not enough on its own. There are other layers to that. Does that do any good?
Yeah, I think that helps. I have more questions, but I'm not going to monopolize the time. I'll catch you.
We have another question session and then the workshop at the end. So there's, we're hoping not to just shut everyone up, give everyone lots of time.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Did you?
I was just curious if you have any thoughts on the question of, like in this type of system, I don't know, the creation of like scrip, of just like kind of a little fiefdoms of little currency, I don't know, dictatorships or whatever you want to call them, where, because like the example you gave was like if we have like a Ko-Fi consulting firm, I'm just imagining, just because of those words, that's like a for-profit entity that issues its own currency. And if like within the context of
that from the 19th century.
Yeah. So I was just curious how.
Take me, but I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.
Do you have any like thoughts on, I don't know if the right idea is like mechanisms or just like practices that avoid that type of dynamic? Is there anything specific about scrip that you think this avoids?
Well, the key thing about scrip was that you worked and earned, and there was only that currency, and you were in it. The whole point of this is everything's voluntary, everything's a mutual. So number one, all these organizations that we build, that we propose, we build a mutual. We don't run it. We are a service member of it for as long as they want us to help them run it, but they can run it themselves or they can hire someone else to run it. So number one. And the second thing is, because of this fractal overlapping diversity, you can be in several of these at the same time. You're not owned by a context. The whole thing is that's diversity. So that's a short answer.
So the thing is that it's not owned, like the currency system is not meant to be owned by one entity. Is that kind of what I get? Or like one...
each context owns its own internal, but each one is a mutual of voluntary members. So no one's an employee of that currency, if you like. But
right.
I think that's, there's detail there which we can't get into now, but there's still, you were next.
Yeah, I'm really attracted to this model of soft currencies that you're talking about, and the act of declaration, and having the possibility of overlapping communities where you have different sort of stable coins being used by the same individual because they're part of different coteries, and then layering those and aggregating the different smaller units into larger units. To me, that logic really adds up, and I think it's deep, and it's very similar to what we're thinking about. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the act of declaration, right? The fact of pronouncing the value of a coin or the intentions of a community to work together. I mean, what's the temporal form of that? Is it a narrative? Is it a projection? Is it a future in some way? Because I think that the rhetoric around that is more than rhetoric. It's actually planning. And so how does the planning fit in?
Sure. I guess in the we're much more deliberately, I guess, primitive than thinking about what those have to be. Those will always be what the community intends them to be. So if they just want to say, here's all of us, we're using whatever to coordinate ourselves, and that might be a gift economy, it might be, rampant capitalism, might be anything they want to do, but they want to join a larger context, and they say, we're prepared to have a single balance of trade across all of us in your larger context, and they just declare that they want to do that. They ask for an evaluation, a social evaluation in that larger context as to what their limits of usage might be, and that might be it's typically a mutual credit that we imagine, but doesn't have to be, and they state their own exchange rate. They don't have to say anything at all about their organization, their promises, whatever, unless the mutual context that they're wanting to be a member of asks them for that. So we're sort of, that can be, so you can imagine anything from, pretty much we're here, we say our unit's worth 10, do you want us or not? To we've got this whole social program and this is how we do our social justice and this is how we relate to the ecosystem and we've got this giant manifesto and we've got 1,000 people and they've all signed up to this and we're living in a commune together wearing the same clothes and the same pair of glasses. Anywhere along that spectrum is viable. For us, the social layer and the monetary layer there's a value to the abstraction of money, which is that it allows for more diversity, I think. It's a short answer. Hang on.
Thank you. Within the Credit Commons protocol, it's a shared mutual credit ledger, which allows you to set balance limits, and as Dill said, a social mutual assessment of capacity in order to couple those balance limits to the members' actual productive capacity is a recursive process. And so Dill talked more about the between one group assessment by a larger context, but actually within that group as well, you would expect that the members were mutually assessing each other for what a realistic assignment of balance limits were. And of course, as Dill said, that could be a whole spectrum. That could be purely social, it could be algorithmic, or it could be rules of thumb or some combination thereof. But of course, one of the great things, as we all know about mutual credit, is that it does allow that very tight coupling of the liquidity supply to real productive capacity. It's an elastic credit supply.
My question, in a way, addresses what Josh said about governance and nonprofit versus for-profit. I think right now nonprofit is a better structure, and it made me think about what Hans said about coming together and by the end see what we could do. I was talking with someone this week about a group of Wisdom Circle in my town. They meet every Thursday, and they have 4 or 6 3-hour meeting with no agenda, no debates at all. And it's just an open discussion. And somebody said, well, what do they do? And I said, nothing. And one of the people who leads it, he said, we spend so much time being human doings that we're forgetting to be human beings. And so the question is, how do we treat each other at the edges? And how do you think we can learn how to treat each other better?
I guess just the answer to that question at the end is about the stories. So I have this thing, the current story of money. So you go into a shop with your kid, you buy something. Kid says, how does that work? And the current story is roughly, well, there isn't enough money in the world. So that guy stands in that shop being boring and giving us what we need because he needs money. It's always a struggle to get money. And that's why I have to go to work all day and you never see me. And I only just get back in time to read you your bedtime story because we don't have enough money. I have to go and work. And the whole system, if there was plenty of money, wouldn't work. I wouldn't go to work. That guy wouldn't be in the shop. There wouldn't be a sweetie in the shop for you to have. Now, that's the story of money we tell ourselves at the moment. I contend that exactly the same scenario could happen. Someone in the shop, you go in, you buy a treat for your kid, you come out and they say, how does money work? How does that work? And what you say is, well, we just sort of promised the community that we would do some work for them in the future in return for those sweeties that you've got that you're enjoying. And how does this work? Well, it works because the guy trusted us that we were going to do some work for the community in the future. And so if we want this economy to work, we all have to make commitments to each other and make good on them. Now, those two both support a world that doesn't look too different from what we've got, hopefully with less, destroying of burning of rainforests and murdering of orangutans and social injustice and all those things. But the actual understanding of, oh, there's this interesting system which allows us to have things that we want because we give something. But it's just how you frame that story and changes everything. And I would like to get to the point where parents start telling that story to their children, not the other one. But that can happen through a transition without us having to, let the world burn and discover it again. I don't know whether that's an answer.
I'll add to that. I mean, I'm a great proponent of doing nothing. And I think it's Margaret Kennedy estimated that something like 40–50% of the cost of ordinary goods and services goes to supply chain finance. So one way or another, we all work for the financial system. And if we had large-scale adoption of these collaborative finance tools, we would no longer be working for the finance system, and we would have a lot more time.
For being. Anyone else, or should we jump on to the next section?
So Dill said earlier we were going to talk a bit about tools, and so that's why I'm going to kick off my section of the presentation. In the synthesis section, there was a talk about lenses and economic anthropology and complexity science and how that led to meta models, and the tools were very much skipped over. But of course, the tools at the end of the day are what we work with. This is the landing page on Mutual Credit Services website, and we've organized it according to these categories you can see. The economic tooling here, I think I'm not going to spend so much time on because most of us here are now very, very familiar with these things. Dill has talked quite a lot about the need for social tooling, which enables you to work with new economy activists and design platforms which they think people in their community would benefit from using and could see themselves participating in. And then, of course, right at the far end, the widespread adoption of these platforms might, if they are designed well, lead to these kinds of emergent outcomes, which Dill very clearly stated we cannot directly build. So there is a logic to our website. We've been told in no uncertain terms it has not been reviewed by marketers. We're well aware of that, and we're fine with that. We know at some point it will need to be, but that's what it is. And I hope that if any of you were to find our website, you would find a logical way through a thread through this structure. But for the time being, there's just a few of these tools I'm going to talk about, and those are the ones which relate to scaling. I don't think I'm misquoting Matthew too badly if I say that he opened the conference by saying, go big or go home. And our approach to scaling has already been alluded to quite strongly. It's this idea of the recursive economy and the missing middle, which I'll be talking more about in a few minutes. But some of these tools in particular we see as particularly promising for achieving this scaling. The Credit Commons Protocol, we've just had a bit of a going over. We've said that it defines this recursive mutual credit ledger, which enables you to scale through this recursive fractal federation of value-producing groups offering each other mutual credit. Some of you may be familiar with sociocracy. It's been around for a while. It's been well and truly road-tested in a variety of contexts. Dill and myself are starting to work increasingly in a sociocratic manner, both within the mutual credit services ecosystem, but also within our projects. And what's interesting to note is that sociocracy also defines a recursive federated fractal structure. And so there is this quite natural mapping of the economic groups as suggested by the Credit Commons Protocol and the decision-making groups as suggested by sociocracy. And what we realized is that if you have this mapping, but also recognize the need for providing support services to communities adopting these tools, actually a business model falls out of this quite nicely and quite naturally. Across these different scales, you would expect these different groups, which are using the Credit Commons Protocol, ideally using sociocracy, to require different services. As Dill said, at the grassroots level, we anticipate that these projects will be mutuals owned by and for their members. And they will, of course, still need some support services, but these will typically be networking, recruitment of businesses, talking to local councillors, local business networks. But then at the larger scale, of course, you're going to want technical support services, economic consultancy, and perhaps governance support as well. And then at the very highest tier, where you are really trying to look at the global scale, that is very much more of a learning network, research and development functionality. And so by noting that these federated fractal structures would require different kinds of support in order to be viable across different scales, we started to think about our business model. And then we actually came across a concept called social franchising. And so we consider MCSI as moving in the direction of becoming a social franchise which provides support services to these different tiers of a federated fractal structure, which we refer to as the Credit Commons. And the ultimate aim of all this, of course, is to empower value-producing groups at all scales to issue their own credit. And what we think is that in the same way that the Nixon shock has conditioned markets for the last 50 years, adoption of CoFi tools at scale will condition markets to serve needs directly, and that will lead to deep and irresistible systems change. So I've just talked a lot about these tools, which are recursive, and in principle, that recursion can go on infinitely. The Credit Commons protocol can always spawn a child ledger. In a sociocratic group, you can always form a subcircle. So in principle, these structures are infinite. Infinite recursion is supported, but of course, in practice, in the real world, the degree to which you can actually map on this kind of highly idealized, abstract, very geometrically pleasing concept is obviously always going to be limited. And so what does at all scales actually mean in practice? I said we're trying to empower value-producing groups at all scales to issue and manage their own credit. But what does that look like in the real world outside of these very pleasing mathematical abstractions and structures? And what we can do is we can give a bit of a coarse breakdown of domains, and each of these have their own characteristics, and we can associate some of these characteristics. And so Dill has already spoken to this way of thinking originating in pattern languages, where you talk about emergent properties, which you can't directly build. You can merely create the conditions for their emergence. The things you can actually build, the attainable visions, the most ambitious thing you could imagine bringing into being. And then the doables, the next steps, the things you can sit down and say, right, we could feasibly do this within a week, within a month, based on these resources. And we can also, I suppose, correlate these with some other categories. Of course, at the doable scale, we typically talk about, what can I do? At the buildable scale, you can get more ambitious and talk about the social structures which would enable an ambitious vision to be brought into being. And at the emergent level, we have civilization-wide properties. And then if you are translating those into economic terms, at the emergent civilizational scale, for a long time, really the best we've been able to do is statistical overviews, which are inherently reductive and airbrush over a lot of the diversity. And if they are translated into policy, lead to top-down interventionist thinking, which... yeah.
Change, everyone. I'm moving it. Go on. Please.
And of course, we all know that has unintended consequences. And then at the micro scale, we talk about Homo economicus and this idea of the rational, self-interested maximizer. And what we actually see, however, is that neither of these things, the big statistical macro overview or the atomized individual, are recognizable elements of the places we actually live: communities, places, businesses, and institutions. And so the way we talk about mutual credit services work, we talk about a direction, the emergent properties we would like to see at the civilizational scale. We talk about a vision, the most ambitious thing we could imagine building, and then we talk about practical next steps. And it's actually important to note that this itself is recursive. Your next step might be to build a project, but actually, before you start a project, you would probably want to say, what's the direction we want this project to be heading in? What is the vision for this project? And then what are the next steps which would enable that? And that enables you to zoom very, very quickly between scopes and scales, which are the kind of meta models which we, although that's the kind of processes which you need in order to be able to work fluently with these meta models. And the bit I'm going to talk about now is the bit in the middle, which we refer to as the missing middle. Oh, and just before I go on to talk about that, of course, I'm going to be talking about economics and what we are calling mesoeconomics and market design. But actually, and this is a bit of a hand-wavy argument, but you can see this idea of the missing middle in other disciplines as well. For example, in history, you have the great man theory of history, that one individual can single-handedly change the course of events. And then you have the kind of clash of civilizations, huge global narratives. In biology, for a long time, it was all about the cataloging of individual species, and then universalist explanations such as Darwinian evolution, which purported to explain everything about the biosphere. And actually, ecology, which is in many ways about the middle, is a 20th century science. And I would invite you to think, if you have a particular home discipline, whether you can imagine any other examples of your discipline paying an awful lot of attention to the micro and to the macro, but neglecting what's in the middle. So mesoeconomics. We describe this as the missing middle, and we contend that it has been hollowed out from the top down by universalist currencies, such as the dollar being the prototypical example, and by macroeconomic statistical policy, and from the bottom up by individualist culture, which of course is taken to the point of parody and beyond by Homo economicus and microeconomics. And what's more, we believe that this is actually the space for action, because in the missing middle, theoretical insight meets real-world constraints. There's also scope for meaningful collective action, for things we can do collectively, which we cannot do either as individuals or as whole societies. And of course, one of these things we do really, really well in groups is social learning and problem solving. And actually, this is something which, if there are appropriate frameworks, can actually massively reduce the technical and institutional overheads in order to be effective. And of course, it's also where the feedback loops from the micro and the macro must pass through, particularly if we wish those feedback loops to remain within reach and understandable by people and communities. And we think that network science and bioregionalism, which again are really 20th, 21st century frameworks for thinking, they provide an understanding of structure and boundedness that can inform these feedback loops and enable us to transcend this split between micro and macro. And finally, we contend that within this space, there are not enough markets to instantiate these healthy feedback loops, and that the markets which do exist are typically hobbled by poor mechanics, a lack of effective tools. And of course, that's what we've been talking about all week, are these effective tools. Impositions by would-be social engineers who have possibly utopian visions of how things should be, but because they are unable to persuade people or because they lack effective tools, they're reduced to attempting to impose policy prescriptions and shoulds and oughts. And finally, just to really belabor the point of feedback loops, we think that in the mesoscopic markets which do exist, there is not enough attention to viability, to surviving and actually altering the hostile landscape within which they must be seeded and built. And we argue that if we used to have it, whether it is community, autonomy, local culture, and wealth, but we no longer do, it's been taken away from us. If we attempt to rebuild these things without addressing the wider conditions which led to their disappearance in the first place, then we are doomed to fail. So, designing markets. We've identified this missing middle as the design space, and we've said a few things about where it comes from and what we think its characteristics are. But what do we actually mean by these things markets? If we're talking about these as the attainable visions, the most ambitious things we could imagine building with the tools at our disposal, what more can we say about them? Deal kicked off by talking about civilization and civilization building through coordination between diverse outgroups. And of course, markets also do price finding. They are bounded but interconnected. And we maintain that the value of a market proposition will actually correlate strongly with the degree to which the potential circularity within that market is not being cleared. And so the lack of clearing, one way or another, will be limiting trade through a lack of liquidity, debt gridlocks, or cost of finance. And it's very, very likely that there will be extractive service providers already in place, banks and brokers, and they will be exploiting these blocks for profit with no interest in actually resolving them. And therefore, a comprehensive market design which resolves these blocks will not just increase the volume of market exchange, it will actually provide savings through reduced fees to service providers. And if we can design the market in such a way that this value is distributed across the participants, we can create win-win-win rewards to all participants, bar, of course, the incumbent service providers. Furthermore, well-designed markets will support a lifelike economy for all participants. And what do we mean by this? This is a term which Dill uses quite frequently, and again is informed by pattern language. So I won't spend too much time on that, but you can imagine a lifelike market is one in which people know how the market works. It's not mysterious, alienating, imposed. They know where the numbers which are used to account for value exchange come from, where they go and why they work, and Dill illustrated that with the sweet shop story. And what that means is that they can actually bring their whole selves, their ethics into transactions because they understand what's going on. They don't need to block any part of themselves off and pretend that, oh, this is just work or this is just my economic activity and it's not really who I am. That is profoundly alienating. And if a market is designed well, we believe that actually it will be less painful for people to bring their ethics to their market activity. And then looking up the hierarchy of scope, we also believe that, again, that if designed well, markets can provide these healthy feedback loops outwards to the macro civilizational scale and lead to the kind of emergent outcomes which we cannot build directly. So design principles. When we are working with a community of economic activists, the best place to start, we found, is to start talking about inside flows. What is the circularity of local resource exchange which already exists? Where is the life which can be supported, built upon, and maintained? And then we start to think about deploying CoFi tools which match and reinforce these inside flows. It's very important to take care around the interfaces with fiat. Of course, everyone lives almost all of their lives in the fiat economy. It's not realistic to expect that people will suddenly up sticks and move their entire existence into a parallel system. But of course, you do need some kind of interface. And it's really, really important to make sure that the interfaces you design are done in such a way that the context you're trying to build is viable. And ideally, it's actually enabling people to bring more and more of their economic activity inside the new system and therefore build it further. We also believe it's really important that we have a non-extractive business model for providing these market services. We ourselves need to be viable, and I spoke previously about how systemic dysfunction in many marketplaces, that is the premise of the business model of many market providers, service providers, and of course that's who we don't want to be. But at the same time, we do need to be able to finance our own growth. And finally, a very, very important market design principle is support for commons governance. And we maintain that the common pool resource, which we are supporting commons governance of, is trust and hence credit. And so we can summarize this by saying that design of markets is the design of inside monies for inside flows. So doable next steps when we're actually building a market. What we have observed from our experience, and Dill put up a whole bunch of projects on the Wardley map slide. What we've tended to observe, and what we always want to be doing, is moving along this progression, is what can we do here is the first type of question we get asked. This could be characterized as innovation, working with activists to co-design a novel approach for their context. Secondly, we might hear, can you help us? We already have an existing project, but we're not satisfied with the fact that it relies on bank money. In some way, it's not viable. We'd like to be doing more and more to build this project and get people excited about it. And so we support existing projects with systems which enhance their impact and engagement. Once or twice, we've had someone come along and say, we want one of those. They've heard about some work we've already done, which is advanced to a reasonable degree of development. And they said, oh, I've read a bit about that, and I really like the idea of having it where I am. So can we have one of those? And that's almost starting to sound a bit like a product. And then finally, as Dill said right at the start, we need to get to the point in not too short order where it's basically a commodity. It's no harder than setting up a WordPress, and a group can just come along and say, actually, we'll start one of those. We might need some support to instantiate the system and maybe choose some parameters, but actually, it's really just all very routine. And so finally, I'd just like to put up this slide, which has a list of some of the projects which we are building at the moment. And after some Q&A, I will talk about Local Loop Lancaster and Morecambe, and then a bit about trade credit clubs. But I'll also invite you, if there's anything here which takes your interest, be more than happy to answer questions about it.
Thank you for the presentation. We were speaking the other day about how to scale faster, better, and what else. I think that the motto of the event is go big or go home is not like technically appropriate, even if we know what we mean, because we know that we want other forms of scaling, not the traditional ones like the Silicon Valley style. And we have, I don't know, federated scaling, scaling through, scaling horizontally, all this kind of scaling that we like. To me, it's very interesting, and it's a question I give to you now for the public. Given that the main thing that we have to scale and augmenting is spreading is the knowledge in the end, the knowledge that we have as incorporated beings, given that we don't privatize software, we don't privatize data, we don't privatize tools, and we cannot have business models on them. But knowledge is very sticky. It's difficult to spread in a fast way. How do you think we can spread this kind of knowledge, and how do we train thousands and millions of mutual credit engineers, social, economic engineers in the world to make it faster?
Yeah, so I'd start by pointing out that I completely agree. The barriers to entry right now are enormous right across the spectrum. There is no awareness of these tools in the outside world, much less a recognition that they are in many ways what people need. That's a huge barrier to entry. In technical terms, yep, the tech's all still in development. Operationally, we're really just starting to get a strong sense of what it takes to support one of these projects in terms of economic analysis. Again, there's not a huge pool of expertise out there, and translating the expertise which exists, providing things like tools, metrics, dashboards, which enable on-the-ground coordinators to make decisions within their communities is a whole job of work. And then, of course, there's governance. Commons governance, sociocracy, again, most people aren't familiar with them. So there are huge barriers to entry right across the whole spectrum. And what we've got to try and do, and this is very much going back to the reasons Dill gave for why we're trying to do so much, is that we know we've got to lower these barriers to entry right across the whole spectrum. We've got to get it to the point very, very quickly where people are aware of these tools, they know that they work, they can imagine themselves using them and could envisage how they could adapt them to their context. And that is a huge amount of work, but we think that the best way we can progress all of those things simultaneously is to work on real projects. We're fairly convinced that if we can get even a handful of instances of something like multilateral obligation set off working in the real economy, then the amount of interest it will spark will be fairly spectacular. And of course, what we intend with the social franchise business model is that we have the organizational capacity in order to respond to demand, which at the moment, if we were kind of, flooded with inquiries, we would not really be able to, we would be paralyzed. And so that we know we've got to simultaneously build our capacity to scale those things. With the social franchise model, as I said earlier, part of the reason for having that is that apart from the fact that it maps onto the economic structures we're trying to build, you can also say, you can characterize the kinds of services which those instances of the mutual credit services business would have to provide. And so you can say very, very clearly, in the ideal case, if you would like to set up one of these networks in your community, we can provide the tooling, the economic analysis, the legal agreements, even make recommendations for software platforms which do customer relationship management right down to a very granular level. And all you need to be able to do is bring along a critical mass of businesses in your community. That would be a very, very good place to be. And then if you are interested in more the research and development, more the economic analysis and support, then maybe there's a place for you in the mutual credit services business at one of the higher levels of federation. The point is, you can imagine people coming in at a certain level, starting to learn about these things, building their skills, building their capacity, and actually, in a sense, having a kind of career progression, which enables them to contribute towards growing the ecosystem in all sorts of different ways. So that was quite a long-winded answer, but I think that hopefully gives a sense of what we mean by scaling and addressing the barriers to entry across the whole spectrum.
And I'd like to make it even longer, but I'll
Please
hopefully do so in a short way. The very immediate need, and you spoke to it exactly, is training more people, is what we want to do as soon as we can. Hopefully, maybe this autumn, is begin a sort of online small group co-education groups for people who would like to also call themselves mesoeconomy designers. And that doesn't mean they have to buy into our ecosystem, but who are prepared to accept a sort of a conversation that's relatively bounded around the actual practical business of working with activists and communities, what the tools are out there, what the approaches are, what the processes are, and what the requirements are for doing that, and just sort of build a cadre of people who feel like they can meet a community confident. So just as an architect can work with a building client, just as an engineer can have, we want people who say, yes, I'm a local economy designer.
Oh, and very finally to add to that, just to make it even longer. Fine, yeah. Is each of these projects we consider to be an instantiation of a model, and what we want, using a kind of pattern language approach, is once we've done a few projects which instantiate a model, such as Local Loop running on MTCS, is an example of what we might very generically call a clearing club. We anticipate being able to document and tease out the general principles which make this make sense in a variety of contexts, but also provide the scope for adaptability. And so we're trying to strike a balance between replicability, thank you, and customizability.
Sure. I think you touched on this still a little bit in the last answer, but I was just curious more is, what does your roadmap look like in terms of like discrete timeframes? Like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And then like when you get 10 years out, what does that equilibrium point look like?
We're not very good at doing those sort of things that social enterprises are supposed to do, sort of having a 3-year, we're just going as fast as we damn well can, in the wisest way we can, which is the sort of agile approach, I guess, trying to make good choices. We are also very pragmatic and opportunistic. When people come to us with something that looks like it's got some meat to it, got some interest to it, like when the guy phoned me up about the housing issue, I knew that if we could do something about housing, just the simple dumb fact about housing is the biggest crypto ever got, which essentially is what got everyone to this space, was $3 trillion. The whole boiling everything, crap coins, everything. Just the UK housing market on its own is $6 trillion. So if we can do something in housing, the total accessible market is astonishing. So really, we're going to go as fast as we can, as broadly as we can, hopefully with as many new friends as we can, without needing you to be part of our project or anyone. You know, this is a ecosystem, can stand a lot of different things going on. If we know how to talk to each other, connect to each other, then we multiply our effect, we multiply our impact, we multiply the public awareness of there being other ways of organizing things which are not weird, but are powerful and supportive. So as to the long-term future, I really have spent a little bit, what we try and do is spend about 80% of our time thinking about next steps and about 20% of our time thinking about future next steps and what the blocks to those might be and what we might seed now that might help us do those. And one of the things that I think about is tipping points. And I think at some point, the best I've got on this, and maybe some people here have done more thoughtful work about this, is that at some point we crash fiat. What and how that goes, whether it's slow and ugly, which it probably will be, and how the resilience that we have built inside these spaces is powered by that rather than destroyed by that, is a huge and important question. But that is pretty science fiction at the moment. But it's not that we don't think about those things. We try not to think about them too much, just enough at all times.
Thank you for this, and it's cool to see these graphics are really excellent. I was going to say, did you have two things? Do you have any documentation on the housing commons plans and or model diagrams? If you could share, that would be fantastic. I would like to hear more on the how, but I suppose that would be probably a long explanation, but I'm happy to hear that. That's something. And then second, in the realm of coeducation, I just wanted to call out an organization called Token Engineering Academy, to which I volunteer a lot of my time. They've developed a token engineering fundamentals course, which is free, which is delving into engineering, modeling and simulation, mathematical formalization, like maths for crypto, specifically for crypto economics and dynamic games. There's a little bit of game theory, and there's a governance section, which is more conceptual. So anyway, we have noted many times there is no monetary theory going on in crypto. So I would love to see your school maybe, combining forces. And I'm happy to make the introduction to have a monetary theory course. And I know, Matt, you do a lot of education. I want to really make that connection because I feel like it's super important to start to have the monetary theory discussion in the core of the token engineering education courses. So I'm happy to facilitate that. That would be exciting.
Thanks. And the gamification stuff sounds good as well. We're currently doing a small bit of research on designing a serious game to explain the multilateral obligation set-off concept. And rather than presenting it in a kind of linear, here's a website page, here's a PowerPoint presentation about it. Of course, the concept itself is fairly mechanistic and can be understood in fairly reductive terms. As ever, it's the complex emergent outcomes which are interesting and very, very hard to communicate and understand in a linear way. And so we're exploring the potential of gamification to onboard new team members. If you want to set up a multilateral clearing club in your town, get together a handful of people, play the game, see if you still think it's a good idea, talk about community wealth building, talk about the circular economy, talk about economy mapping, and what, more importantly, the connections are between them. And so we're working on a very simple game which allows groups to explore these things. And we're going to be producing 10 copies. I'm doing a workshop in Liverpool where I live with the first prototype copy, but we're going to have another production run of 9 or so. And if anyone's particularly interested, I can see about sending you one of those copies. And of course, the quid pro quo there would be that because it's a research project, it would be very, very helpful for you to tell us whether it was actually useful in understanding multilateral obligation set off, whether it made you more or less enthusiastic about it, whether it left you with more questions than it answered, whether it is effective for team formation, onboarding, and social learning.
Any other questions, or we move on to a more participatory workshop section? If that's, yeah,
We've
seems like
got
that's
a
probably
section on
Oh.
the local league project,
Oh,
but
we've got a
I've been
little bit
speaking
more
for a
to do.
while, so we could do the workshop and then come back for that. I don't know.
How are we doing for time? I have no idea, completely no idea. It's 12 now. We've got theoretically an hour and a half till lunch.
Try and keep it a bit shorter than an hour and a half.
Well, okay. So yeah, maybe we do a workshop for half an hour and then see where we go from there. Because I think we've been talking a lot, and it was really nice, the energy in the beginning. So okay. So do we have a slide about the workshop? Do we? No, we don't. Do we not? Not even at the end? No. Okay. So what we want to do with the workshop is, what do we want to do with the workshop? What do we want to do with the workshop?
Tables and they're going to synthesize their tools.
That's it. That's it. So we have some people who've already agreed to be sort of pegs in groups. They're not needing to be facilitators. And we want sort of groups of 3 or 4 people. And we want you to come together with people you don't know, or with people you know have different models than yours. And the idea is, within that group, over the space of about 30 minutes, to think about how, without coalescing those projects or all agreeing to work in the same thing, these separate ideas, these separate approaches, separate interests could build an economic interaction between them. So it's sort of experiencing what recursion in economy might be like. So the whole point of the Credit Commons is that it allows any group that has any economic model whatsoever, if it's willing to join with other groups and say, we'll share a single balance of trade with you guys, then anyone can connect to anything. But obviously, Cosmos is an interchain protocol. EXA have got protocols for. It's not about any particular system. What it's about is enabling people to socially coordinate around their desires in the context of constraints, and what works for them or in a particular context doesn't need to be subsumed into someone else's idea because their idea is going faster or something. But how can they interact? So we chose some people. I think Janet at the back, I asked you if you would be one host. That's okay? Yes. Did I get in? I got your name. I did say Janet. No, I didn't get your name. Yeah, are you okay to do that? Yeah, that's great. So, and then Hans and Jason and Will and Julio all agreed to be, I think we might need Tom and I as well to have groups of 3 or 4. So if you hosts wouldn't mind circulating yourself around the rooms to collect 2 or 3 people each. Scott, maybe you would like to be a host for that as well. I don't think I asked you last night, but that would be cool. Yeah. And then let's see. And then Tom and I will float free and collect anyone who's not together. We have plenty of time for this. Yeah, sort of, not 3 people from EXA in one room, sort of, because they'll just say the same thing. You two have to split up for the workshop. You're not allowed in the same room. No, that's fine. You okay with it? I mean, hopefully a group will come to you, or these people here will be your group or whatever. Yeah. Now, for about half an hour or so, yeah, and just see how people think about working together bringing their different projects together without changing them too much. Is the thought. Yeah. Okay. Yes, we will be in touch for sure. Yes, yes. Right. Remember your generous offer. We haven't even had time to speak since then, but for sure, we will definitely be offering some thoughts to you and seeing which ones make sense. Brilliant. Thank you. Great to meet you. Yeah. Thanks. So, got a group. There's a group. Going to join a group? Yes. It's all too much. Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a group over here. So anyone, 1, 2, 3, 4 people. Two, 3, 4 people. Otherwise, it would be too much. Yes. Maybe there are.
and neutral credit, use credit obligations are created, and spending back within that same economy. It's a rational element of Right, yeah, people are going to want to spend more or less on their existing facilities in these contexts. So this is neutral credit within a business context. And it's not saying, right, here's our business separate transactions, numbers are arbitrary, so it really matter. If they're not showing any information, the working capital they need is what if they're balances over periods, to get through that go past. Whatever your balance is, that's your working capital. So it's not a shared ledger, and your working capital costs of your net position at the end of the period. You just have all the obligations remain open to the settings, and they net credit until continuously. And so you're already going to reduce working capital. Your neutral credit is go one step further. Say, here's a balance order mechanism, say we're assigning you a balance limit of 100. And that actually, obviously, those balance limits are usually assessed on the basis of real capacity. Also, the member can say, well, actually, no, I don't want that balance limit, so I don't want to respond to the network. So the individual can calibrate their balance limits according to their size, exposure, to each credit or fee. And so exactly the same, you need to be able to make those choices based on their business and market conditions. And not having the components or feel that they're locked in. It also what's nice about this is always an incentive to design flexibility. What's it very well to use yeah, able to set their preferences. Well, because in this instance, people are it is very hard to get surprises because people want to say, oh, I'm going to put neutral credits and understand that they want to be risky. So I'm going to sell them for the outside network. And of course, that leads to potential inflation is kind of the group. But of course, the design, you can't tell you how to manage the network. The point is to try to look at the mechanism which enables you to do that by changing their balance limits or their exposure limits in a way which is kind of preemptive in the sense of the agreement. And so they very much manage their exposure and desire to be not exposed to more exposure to more or less within the kind of met, but in a way which is yeah, I mean, not trying to share ledger, which takes you this long, and it also requires balance is now the next set balance limits. So effectively, yes, you can still says, we have life. But not quite yes, implementation. This is really the point of this one is this is not a step. If you can go through this and say you already invoice such that you already do trade credit, you already do pay trade credit, you don't have to wait and stuff. Credit. You just say all the trade credit. And at the end of the period, say, okay, you have a lot of accounts receivable, some positive, negative, like it's not one account, and the treat is not accounts receivable. It's not just with it's just you're already doing it, you're already doing financial trade credit, but you call it share report to get these benefits. So it's designed in order to be able to go talk to ordinary businesses and speak their language. And reduce that's kind of another way of talking about it. You can imagine that the full trade credit is described in this context. You could but again, so it is yes, you have this critical to know, and it's really federated with other trade credit funds, other And in a sense, yeah, they talk about this thing stablecoin, but in this particular context, that are like the right man versus the right way to talk about it. It's very different. Yes, exactly. If you put it on this protocol, if you have a group which has done exactly this, share that and then wants to federate another group as part of that federation, they have to agree that that's their registration rate. And then ultimately, that large group will do exactly as nothing will say that will be a process of expensive and the assessment of whether their request to have a large credit as the exchange rate indicated their savings point, the one context was realistic assessment or was to be done. So yeah, exactly that. Exactly. So yeah, the exchange rates would be negotiated also, but it's subject to some markets. We claim, we 10 times, we reserve whatever, which is 1,000 times our actual turnover. People will say, whether you pay up or you don't have to accept, and they'll be some kind of exchange rate, which to the extent they can actually use this as each other, and again, that's straightforward. They can actually provide an exchange rate which is socially negotiated, so it doesn't vote or via external governance, but it is subject to some so it's just kind of about the group that's and of course, all this the upgrade is say exchange rate which lies on it, wide rate, then it has to start up itself, so we've got to die up capacity, and it could happen, but it's, they're going to get that low. I think there really is. Again, it's kind of, we're convinced that yes, it's working. Again, because these things are astonishing when powerful markets, but there's nothing we can point to and say that this is and if you want to know how it is going to look at have a look around their town, see how well it's doing. Go to run some businesses, hospitals like years of systems, but that's way off from that yet. We think that has to be keep us wise to some sort of one to say so that's one thing, a few years when we're talking about space, also you were like around Scott, quite sort of I mean, I guess we said, we work on Scott, so we're going to architect experimental sort of software design, and so actually, the way to talk about that, I recognize but it was the way things works, the way it actually works. So you actually have to think in a way that's quite productive, quite think about scale and scope and all those kinds of things. But these are doing ambitious work. So in a sense, we have a bit of a head start, but these things are so poorly understood before I came across the stuff. I think there was really else the great on the economics. It must have something to do with young people questions. I've never had like a vertical point of which fraction of anything else. So we kind of think it's quite a bit the most fundamental
Because I feel like people call it the only creator, but actually you can do like any kind of graphic edition on zero knowledge with all the because we have research in about that these types. And so we just collaborate there are ways that you can get questions is really not fully
It seems those project budgets seem like it's right for free. So are the promises unit management and then are the resource or they suggestion was offering it might make a game for administration and I'm sure to utilize that. So Already, so you're starting, you're ahead. Beautiful. Yep. It was on here, but you probably half figured it all out already. But anyway.
That's what they're going to say.
Yeah, maybe not until you just about really, like, you got this mistake where you can come to for a couple of minutes and just say, like, what we want to do is to invite people to do what you're doing now and put their stuff on the whiteboard and then talk about it. So do you think you can kind of be able to talk about this in the next 2 minutes? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, yeah. Okay, clap once if you can hear me. Clap twice. Clap 3 times. Thank you. What we're going to do to round up the workshop session is we're going to ask people from each group if they wish to. We're going to ask people from each group if they wish to come up to the whiteboard, sketch out their proposal, and spend a couple of minutes talking about it, and then do a quick Q&A. So, Jorge, if you want to just talk for maybe 2 or 3 minutes about the synthesis which your group produced.
Yeah. So it's not here. Chris, are you? Because it works also for Chris. So I wanted him to understand this. So we work together with grassroots economics in the farmer side with the Kenyan farmers, coffee producers, which is something we have been talking these days, that these farmers not only can live with their vouchers, they also need some TradFi money to pay for some things like computers or so, or machinery. And in the other hand, we work with Nicolas, which this community called vouchers in Belgium. So we have at the two ends of the value chain already with voucher systems in place. And in between, we have Ethic Hub, which have the capacity to import, export the coffee, and financing all this time in between that is required. I think here there is a clear opportunity to rethink a full value chain from the ground up, even in developing economies to the developed ones, leveraging on the already established voucher systems in the two ends of the value chain, and with the capital inflow that we can bring with Ethic Hub. But so we envision here in two ends of the in-between, because from the end consumers to the coffee shops and shops where they buy coffee, this is where it is already established, the vouchers. In the other end, the farmers and their community is the vouchers in. So in the relation between these communities and the cooperative, and in the relation of the shops to the roaster, is where there is the opportunity to increase the community currency demand, the credit system, mutual credit system is to be increased.
So in that process, as I understand, there's three inside monies. There's the Serafo inside money, grassroots economics inside money. There's the Ethic Hub inside money. And then there's the local currency inside monies in Belgium. And they have all a relationship to fiat, but it's always a relationship with friction to it. So that if this relationship between these three inside monies is mutually reinforcing, then the more mutually reinforcing is, the more places there are for value that's not denominated directly in fiat.
Exactly.
That's right. Brilliant.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's great. There's someone from another group who's wanting to tell us. Yeah, great.
Thanks. I think we had 4 types of thinkers in our group. And I think Hans pointed out really nicely that in a way the current is like one arm giving in that direction, and the other arm is taking. So there's the give and the take in the mutual credit. And then Reluca is just giving with no expectation of reciprocity. And then Teodoro, in a way, is analyzing what we're doing. So he's at a desk writing, studying the movement of our systems. While Hans is a great thinker, looking at the whole ecosystems with a huge brain. Yeah, and he has a perspective of history. So he's comparing things that have worked, things that come and go, have perspective of each other's systems. And then Blanca, amazingly, is giving with the circles, UBI, receiving, but has an extra arm of giving. And that, we talked about the major economies of the world, like gift economy, exchange economy, and theft economy. And we didn't go into theft at all because it's not important to us. But I love how the gift is injecting extra in two models. And we also talked about kindness indicators and true kindness, false kindness, and unkind acts. And maybe without stepping on any ideas or toes, having a kindness indicator help people understand the mesh and the trust between each other. And if it's only false kind acts, you're still earning credits for the false kind giving with no expectation of reciprocity. But over time, those false kind acts could become truly authentic kind acts.
That's nice. So if I hear that right, then what there is in that. If I have that right, and tell me if I haven't, there is in that conversation an invention of a meta token, a meta currency, to use a holochain word, which is this kindness scoring thing. It's not really attempting to be an exchangeable token. It's intended to be some sort of indicator of the health, the kindness, the willingness to contribute to the health of the system. So it's a sort of meta indicator, an impact score. So that's really nice if I haven't got that wrong. Thank you. So someone, oh.
May I add a meta perspective? I think when we start to talk about the real thing, the real needs, there is no much difference. But when we start in money, we have so much differences.
Thank you. So, Will, were you?
Yeah, I could come up and talk about my group. So we were just talking about what is this meso? Why do we have it? Because the two alternatives are one global system that everyone's a part of, or no systems, just all individuals. Why do we have something in between? And so here's a system right here, and it has a big arrow coming in, and then there's the membrane of the system, and it becomes a small arrow. And then here's a big arrow moving out, and it becomes a small arrow when it passes through. And this is basically what meso is, that you have enough information passing through the membrane of the system that you have trust, but you don't have such an overwhelming barrage of information that you can't keep track of it all, and there's no point in having different systems. So that was one of the basic ideas that we were talking about, how these things occur, of this kind of interiority and exteriority, and having a semi-permeable membrane between them. And then one of the other points was just that these systems work when you remember that we begin and end with people. And when we get too abstract and tenuous, you end up in a situation where you lose track of the people. That ultimately economies are starting and ending with people, and let's build systems that optimize for who people are.
So having set myself up for this, I'm going to have to try and interpret this one, but I think it's rather beautiful. So rather than inside this membrane, rather than be faced with the enormity of the global economy, you're saying, now this is quite simple. We only allow this simple amount of information to come in. And within this group, value is created according to their interactions, which feels large to them. But again, they expose only a certain amount, certain variety of that to the outside. So that's brilliant. And this allows the space inside here to be mostly about the people inside here and less about the outside, without losing energy in and ability to communicate outwards.
You could have a whole lot of these circles, as many as you want.
Brilliant, thank you.
And just to add to that about having lots and lots of circles, you can imagine that if this group is indeed successful in forming this membrane and creating a context in which collaboration is rewarded, you can well imagine that actually these cooperative, collaborative groups starting to outcompete the competitive ones. And that is a evolution, a way in which we can start to imagine the culture evolving.
From another group? Julio.
We're gonna do it collaboratively. In the
However
trios.
you want to do it. But you still only have 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, we'll be fast. So the constellation of the group was Informal Systems, Circles, Holochain, and Exa, and we came up with doing a pilot together. Now, where we started was that Informal and Circles, we're working towards integrating the MTCS and Circles mesh and liquidity provision for productive investment in the meso economy in a privacy-preserving way using a NOMAS or TIGAS infrastructure, which you can ask me what that is, or you can ask Patrick what that is. So the questions that we posed were, how will it be like if Circles and MTCS use Holochain in a privacy-preserving way using a NOMAS fractal instances? So a provocation there also with Exa was to say, could Exa collaborate with us on this one project to make explanations of the systems in a simple to understand way? Could we do a mutual staking or co-investment strategy on the tokens needed to run these nodes in of these open infrastructures? So the idea would be to do pilots to test this, and now Paola will talk about the architecture.
Okay, so yeah. So by the way, I've got a bit of credit on time. Okay, if you remember, I only spoke for 10 minutes. Everybody else spoke for an hour, so I've got 2 extra minutes. Okay. extra minutes. So yes, the idea started, well, we realized that there was a natural compatibility between the Circles point of view, which is more socially oriented, where trust is a primitive, and the Holo chain architecture, which is based on agents that communicate in relatively small groups. So we felt that that was an interesting starting point for a bottom-up approach at, creating some of these applications. Then I would say the overarching concept here is the evolution of infrastructures. An example of that would be, if you look at Ethereum, in Ethereum, the consensus protocol was part of the application. What Cosmos did was to move the consensus to the infrastructure as Tendermint or Comet BFT today, and the blockchain became the application. What we're thinking could make sense in order to integrate Cosmos, Circles, Holochain, and Exa could be to essentially bring the Holochain and Circles together at the application layer to utilize an ANOMA-like Cosmos blockchain as a persistence layer, and to have all of this work with appropriate cryptographic guarantees.
Yeah, that was great. I don't have much else to add, just how to leverage the affordances of each part of the stack in a way that makes sense. So the smaller the scale, the more trust you have, the less security you need. So you can do a lot of that in Holochain, for example, even doing some credit clearing locally. And then how to have a way to bridge between that eventually consistent pattern with more monolithic truth. So you could have these cyclic patterns where you commit your local source chain to a normal fractal instance, yeah, and just use the affordances of each system.
I don't need to summarize that, I don't think. Do you want to say? No? No? Okay. Does anyone want to speak from the group that I was in, or any?
Just to let you know that lunch will be at 2 o'clock, so there's a bit less time pressure. It's now
That's great, because we know also Terodoro needs some time, and we'd like to just talk a little bit about actual projects a bit, just to show that we're not lying, that we do this nitty-gritty on the ground stuff. So I can speak to the group I was in if that's a good idea. If any of these pens worked, I could draw something, but I don't think they do. Okay. Yeah. So we started. We started with a sort of go round and figuring out sort of where everyone was coming from, and that gradually began to surface both capacities and sort of structures that people wanted to work with. And then we sort of went round and said, okay, and this was, this thing I have of economics, it's social coordination around desire in the context of constraints. So we said, okay, what do people want? What are the desires out of this? And what came out, and the groups were broadly EXA. There was Dave, who was presenting himself mostly as sort of, oh, I'm a software engineer and I'm interested in stuff. And Jakob came with both his Holochain and EXA interests and the work he does at the university and the students and the energy and sort of consistency he's trying to develop there. So what came out of it was that the strongest sort of shared desire was a context in which we could all interact to further this sort of work. And that context needed some consistency, some continuity across time. It could be a virtual place, it could be a real place, but it needed to be more regular than coming here once a year, once every 6 months. And there were some offers into that, or some suggestions into that, from the university and from the energy of the students there. And then, so we had this sort of, okay, this is what we're coming together around, this desire for a context where we can develop further ideas and do experiments, which is what the students can do, and produce material, which is what the students can do, and enrich all our understandings. And then Pekko introduced the thought of a self-reinforcing value loop that goes around, where people offer into that context whatever they want, and that is recognized more or less by the context and then inspires further coming in. And then that results in offers, sort of those are offers into the system. Then there's some method of formalizing those offers so that they begin to become more concrete and people can imagine taking them up, and eventually some sort of unit of account being applied to those offers, and maybe a formalization of the offers so that they become harder, they become promises, they become, and that you aspire to a virtual spiral, upward spiral in that. And I sense that Pekko has great, thank you.
Well, at the outset, like we can put that structure, I think, more simply, although I have my understandings of taking from the conversation and trying to kind of generalize it here as a tough task. But I would generally say we had some good starting points. We essentially ran out of time that we really didn't get to solidify. So we had a couple of structures on the table, but we didn't get to the point of, do we actually agree on this, or do we need something else? I think it's kind of was growing somewhere, but it wasn't at the stage of having flowers yet. It was just green stalks.
Okay, our group was more about reflecting on this gathering. And in summary, we discussed balance here, and we discussed balance, credits, debits. But one thing that was, in my opinion, and we kind of agreed in the group, totally left out is about giving and forgiving. So my expectation, looking at the list of participants, was that this will be part of the discussion. It was left out. So this is now a challenge for Matthew for the next issue of this conference to invite speakers that will enlighten us in the subject of forgiving. Forgiving.
That's all right. So, thank you. Is there another group? You didn't do anything. You had a rest. That's brilliant. That's really good. We forgive you. Thanks so much. So do you want to?
You're gonna have to go all the way back.
Yeah. Okay, you tell me when to stop. Keep going.
Oh yeah. Okay, you didn't see any of that. Are you using this? Oh no, thank you.
Yeah, so we're now going to do the final bit of our talk and going to talk a little bit about some of the projects which we are currently doing. Going to start by talking about our pilot project, Local Loop, Lancaster and Morecambe. Lancaster is a city of probably about 50,000 people or so in the northwest of England. It's about an hour and a half or so away from where I live in Liverpool. And it's got a very strong local economy focus. It's very community-minded. It's geographically quite isolated. And Dylan and myself knew a sadly now deceased new economy community activist who was really the spark and who was the first person who me and Dill met who was really keen on actually co-designing something with us in his context. And we spoke to him quite a lot. He introduced us to a number of people. We discussed mutual credit. And probably at this point, we had heard about multilateral obligation set off from Tomasz and Paolo's paper published at the start of 2021. And it fairly quickly became apparent that multilateral obligation set-off would be a really, really good place to start in Lancaster. It can bring large numbers of businesses into collaborative finance relationships in a relatively low-risk, straightforward way. And so we designed the Local Loop project. Local Loop was named by Michael Hallam, who was the one who invited us up to Lancaster. And it's now been probably our most active pilot project since its inception in August 2021. And I think everyone here understands what multilateral obligation set-off is, so I won't kind of, talk through all of this. But there it is. You see 3 people owe each other money. If they happen to be in a loop, then with the MTCS algorithm, then you can detect that cycle and clear the lowest value invoice. And aside from the wonderful network visualizations which you get as a byproduct of this, of course, it reduces the demands for working capital. It unblocks gridlock situations. It turns loops into chains. And so it resolves these instances where I can't pay because I haven't been paid yet, or at least it makes those less prevalent in the economy. So there are very good reasons for doing multilateral obligation set-off. Oh, too far. And there it is. There's the arithmetic. Sylvia clears everything. She has the lowest invoice. She now owes nothing. And we put together a short introductory video. It's about 2 minutes, which we produced to explain the concept to businesses in Lancaster and the Chamber of Commerce and the City Council and the universities, all the anchor institutions we've been in contact with. Won't play it now, but you can find it on the Local Loop website. And so I guess the early design work which me and Dill did to conceptualize the project and to inform our early strategy was just to observe really that within Lancaster, there are already a number of business networks, and the people who had invited us up to Lancaster were themselves business networkers. There's Business Network International, which is a huge franchise thing. There's a few chapters in most towns, it seems. Interestingly enough, they themselves are not actually premised so much on buying and selling from each other. They're actually much more about generating leads for each other and for being each other's sales team. And so actually, just from this sketch, most of the arrows there between the red blobs, which are meant to represent BNI members, are not intertrade within the BNI chapter. It's actually payments coming in from the wider SME community. And so this is, this is not quantitative at all. It's merely it's a conceptual sketch based on what we were being told by the people in Lancaster about what the landscape of their local economy looks like. And then the other business network was the Ethical Small Traders Association, and that's very much on the micro end of the scale. Sole traders, very, very small businesses, typically have cash flow problems. And actually, as the name implies, ethical small traders, a lot of it is actually about trade amongst each other and bringing ethics into business. And so clearly, they were good seeds to work with. And the concept was that if we could understand in a qualitative sense the local economy by talking to these business networkers and starting to characterize the local economy, then we could actually, I guess, hypothesize what might be necessary, what kind of boundary we might want to draw around the membership of a putative credit clearing club in order to attain the critical mass of network density, which means there are going to be enough loops to make the whole exercise worthwhile. And so we consulted with Tomasz from Informal Systems very extensively on this. He told us that typically the critical mass you might need or want to aim for before you're going to be able to start clearing large amounts of debt is maybe 100 or so businesses with perhaps 3 or 4 trades with the other 99. And so Tomasz was very generous in his expertise and giving us some of the parameters and consulting on the early project development, and Paolo contributed to the project as well at various points. Yes, thank you. And so now where we're at is we are doing a kind of pilot trial survey phase of the project. We're not actually clearing real invoices yet. We're just going around to businesses in Lancaster with the help of our on-the-ground sales team and saying, just tell us a bit about your suppliers. How much do you typically spend with them over a 3-month period? And we've built a very, very simple web app which enables them to do just that. You have a list here of your suppliers, you enter the amount. There's a profile page where you can tell us on the network a bit more about yourself. You can put in your website, tag yourself, tell us a bit more about your sector if you wish to, and then there's a network page. So it's all fairly basic affordances, but it's exactly the kind of things which you would expect from a business networking app. But of course, it's not just business networking. We have MTCS as the engine of this, which is giving people a reason to go into this network directory and actually say, oh, well, maybe I could relocalize my suppliers. The more of my trade I can do locally, the more I can clear, the less likely I am to have cash flow issues. And so we're building in gamification features and affordances which make it very, very clear what the network topology is and which enables people to start relocalizing their supply chains and build circularity. And that speaks to the kind of emergent outcome feedback loops, which I'll come on to in a minute. And Scott, yes.
You guys heard me talk yesterday. I'm looking for a marketplace interface. Is that in the pipeline at all?
Potentially, Dill, you've got more of a sense of.
Well, we have another bit of software which has much more of a marketplace connection. But that doesn't have the invoice stuff. So we're not trying to build one app to rule them all. We build these context-specific things and then figure out how to interoperate between them. But yeah, marketplace app is another project.
Okay, that's done for that one. And so where are we at the moment? This is some network data from the trial. We've got about 30 businesses signed up at the moment. Most of them have put in some estimates of their spending with other local businesses. So I think there are maybe 65, 70 nodes in this network. And what we actually realized is this one at the center is Mutual Credit Services Northwest. Because we are intending to charge for this service a small membership fee, we realized that if we did that via invoicing in arrears rather than direct debit, we can actually enter those invoices into the MTCS clearing system. And because we ourselves have local suppliers, we're a member of the Chamber of Commerce, we have a local accountant, actually we can clear much of our own spending in Lancaster through the income we're generating from running local loop and create a whole bunch of loops, which you see on the right. We can turn ourselves into a super connector, which of course benefits us, but also boosts the system as a whole. So that's where that's at the moment. And we're building up towards critical mass. As I say, we're aiming for about 100 participants, 3 or 4 obligations per participant. We'll expect to see a lot of loops starting to emerge. And Tomasz tells us that it's a kind of phase transition, a bit like water turning into ice. The temperature barely changes, but the qualitative state of the system is completely different. And Tomasz informs us that that's what tends to happen in these networks. At the start, you add a new node. We're praying for the critical, exactly. At the start, you tend to add a new node and it doesn't result in a loop. You get past a certain point and almost every new node results in a new loop.
Can I ask a sidebar question to Tomasz or Tardex guys? Do you have a number around what minimum viable network size looks like? Like just an extra.
It's about the density. It's not about the number of.
Density meaning number of invoices.
Per node. All right, so it's more about a number of invoices than number of nodes.
There's actually 2 answers. So one, when we talk clearing and invoice netting is what just Tomasz has said. I think when you look at mutual credit and local marketplace, the sweet spot is 500. Like if you make it to 500 plus diversity. I mean, you don't need 500 to
No.
Maybe you can start competition or stepping.
Maybe we could have an index, which is like number of companies divided by number of invoices per company.
Yeah.
And I'm just making this up. Okay?
Right now, so it sounds great.
Using numerical data, we might find some sort of
Cool. Just I'm mentally lost types of numbers on a drain, like okay, 200 covers the bases, 600 you filled out the business directory, but it had nothing to do with the invoice stuff. Thank you.
And of course, as we continue to build instances of local loop, our hope would be to be able to partner with business networks who could, bring their client base on at the drop of a hat. So instead of having to do what we're doing in Lancaster, which frankly is quite a slow, steady grind of having to educate a lot of small businesses as to why this might be of use for them. Actually, if we can partner with the right business networks and feed MTCS into their strategy to make them stand out, to encourage them to grow, actually, those are the kinds of partnerships which will enable us to replicate these systems very quickly indeed. And of course, network effects are very real. Thanks. Speaking of super connectors, this is publicly available data from Preston City Council. Preston is just up the road from Lancaster. It's about the same size, maybe a bit bigger, and it seems there's some kind of statutory obligation of councils, municipalities in the UK to publish their procurement data. And so we went on their website and pulled down the data, and I think this is February 2023. Tomasz very kindly produced this visualization, along, of course, with the ones I previously showed. And you can see there's a few hundred, Preston City Council has a few hundred suppliers in any given month. And what's quite interesting is that even with this, this is not a clearing net, this is a node and its suppliers. The most you can hope to find here is a loop of, but actually that's what we do see. There's a light blue one and there's an orange one, and that is presumably the council getting a refund or actually offering some of its services to one of its suppliers. But of course, in any real network, we would want to be recruiting these suppliers off the council. They would be trading amongst themselves. And so you'd see lots and lots of loops with many, many more participants. But this illustrates very, very strongly, if you can get these anchor institutions on board, the councils, the universities, the hospitals, they're not going anywhere, they can't go bust, they care about their local economy. This is a real community wealth building thing which they can do. And we've had quite a lot of success speaking to these anchor institutions and casting these kinds of projects in terms of their policy priorities, such as community wealth building, Preston is the home of community wealth building in England. And not to say the local economy mapping. And this doesn't actually tell you very much, but I couldn't resist putting it in. This is procurement data for the whole of 2022 for the Liverpool City Region Council, where I live. Of course, because it's the whole year, there are a lot of loops where, for example, it is a credit in 1 month, January, and then a debit in July. And of course, if you're running the system on a month-to-month basis, those loops aren't actually going to exist. But nonetheless, what it does show is that there's a large number of suppliers around the outside who have one interaction with the council in the entire year. And then as you get closer and closer to the core, there's this astonishingly dense network of interconnections. And of course, that is the council paying its suppliers regularly. And so if you were to get the council on board, that would be great. But what's more, you'd then say, okay, well, if we can get these suppliers who are right at the core of the network, that's going to build the network still further. And so one of the great things we found from these network visualizations is, of course, they get local people very excited. You can show these to people at these anchor institutions, but the very map of the economy enables you to inform your recruitment strategy. And we have done a bit of reading on the work of a network scientist and sociologist called Damon Centola on how the adoption of new technologies and other complex behavior change spreads. And I'd recommend all of you to have a look at his work. It's very, very important for what we're doing here. But it's nice to note that the economic relationships which correspond to good outcomes from things like MTCS, dense network interconnections, also correspond very, very clearly to these social structures within which new behaviors spread, trust networks. And that's perhaps, when you think about it, not surprising, because the underlying commonality is trust. You don't trade repeatedly with people you don't trust and who screw you over, and you don't adopt new behaviors from people who you don't trust either. And so there's a really, really nice correspondence between these two. And so we use the work of Damon Centola and these network maps to inform our recruitment strategies. And so finally, just to come to the emergent outcomes, because that was what Dil started speaking about, and it's what we designed for. What might be the emergent outcomes of running a multilateral set-off system? I've already talked about community wealth. Businesses there are made more viable. They are less reliant on external expensive financing, bank loans, credit cards in order to finance their working capital. You've created incentives for businesses to relocalize their procurement and shorten their supply chains. You have these network maps. You can not only, in the way we do, use that in order to build the network, but you can identify opportunities for investment. You can see what Tomasz refers to as strategic gaps, where there's a chain, but it's not a loop. But you can say quite a lot about the niche which would have to be filled in order for that loop to become, or for that chain to become a loop. You can say a bit about the goods and services, and you can de-risk investment into these niches in the economy, close loops, and benefit all participants. And of course, talking about loops, talking about circular financial flows, that is the mirror image of the material circular economy. If you can incentivize a circular flow of payments, you can imagine that a material circular economy would start to emerge from the bottom up, because it's been financially incentivized, not because it's been imposed or demanded from the top down by policymakers. Although, of course, a friendly policy framework is great. And so those are a few of the emergent outcomes you might expect to associate with COFI mechanisms such as multilateral obligation set-off. And then on the subject of synthesis, I promise I'm nearly done. That's multilateral obligation set-off, but it's not where me and Dil started. We started with mutual credit. And very early on, Dil and some of the other members of the collaboration at that time came up with what we call the Trade Credit Club model. And this is a proposal for ordinary businesses to integrate mutual credit almost by stealth into their business as usual. We start here by noting that if you have 3 businesses which are invoicing each other, say 30 days to pay, and they're not showing any information, the amount of working capital they're going to need to get through a period, say these are transactions over 1 month, is going to be exactly equal to whatever their minimum balance is. You can see the blue partners business, their very first transaction here is a payment to yellow for 600. And so right off the bat, they need £600 of working capital. However, if you simply set up a shared ledger and you say there is no obligation, next slide please, Dill, no obligation to settle until the end of the period, you just keep a rolling balance, a net position, then what happens is that the amount of working capital required, if you end the period positive, you don't need any working capital at all. If you're negative, you only need what your net balance is. So you allow a kind of continuous clearing process. As the transactions come in, they net off against each other. To the extent that these businesses are in circular relationships, they reduce their need for working capital. And this also has the same effect of MTCS of resolving payment gridlocks. And in fact, it reduces the number of payments needed at all. And then very finally, you can say, what happens if we introduce a balance rollover mechanism? We simply say your net position at the end might be minus 205, but if you've mutually agreed amongst each other that some of that can be carried over indefinitely, in this case, £100, the working capital is reduced still further to 105, and that's mutual credit by stealth. It's pooled trade credit. Businesses already issue invoices with 30, 60, 90 days to pay to each other. Something like 50% of international trade is financed by trade credit agreements between companies and not by banks. This is simply a way of taking that bilateral trust, that bilateral liquidity, and pooling it for shared risk and shared reward in a way which integrates into business as usual. This net position can simply be put in as any other entry on the balance sheet, treated as another bank account. It doesn't require a whole new way of thinking, a whole new way of doing business. Again, it's mutual credit by stealth. And because this is implemented via the Credit Commons Protocol, we can federate these trade credit clubs together into clubs of clubs. And where it gets really exciting is using the network visualizations which you get from running MTCS. What you find is that you always have clusters. There are these power law distributions within economies. And what you find are these clusters within which there's very, very tight trade. And once you've identified these groups and once you've been running MTCS for, say, a few periods, you know what their flows are between each other, and you can approach them and say, well, we know from our network analysis that you are in tight trading relationships with, say, 10 or 15 businesses in your cluster. You're almost certainly already extending each other trade credit. How about you take your collaboration a step further and pool your trade credit, have effectively an internal means of payment, which enables you to increase your benefits. And then what's more, you can use that internal means of payment to actually, as a source of liquidity, which can reach the network periphery, which may not be suitable for a pooled trade credit. And Tomasz tells us that from his studies, you need only a very, very small amount of mutual credit as a liquidity source to inject to the network periphery in order to clear just vast proportions of the outstanding debt. And so MTCS will get you so far. It gives you the network map. You clear a large amount of debt. But if you can go a step further and create contexts in which people are willing to create their own liquidity and share it with the wider network, you can just clear enormous amounts without need for bank money. And so we can layer these tools on top of each other. I'm done. That leads me on to Dill.
Thanks, Tom. How are we on time? Do you want to?
25 past 1.
Okay, so I could talk for sort of 10, 15 minutes and then Teodora would have some time and we'd still be okay for lunch. Maximum 15. I'll try and be really quick. So as well as Matthew, we have another Sage on the Stage type in our collaboration called Chris Cook, who some of you may know, some of you may not. He's a bit harder to understand than Matthew, but he is very good at inventing inversions of phrases and cool things. So he's been in our collaboration that we pulled together pretty much at the beginning of COVID, and never really understood the Credit Commons Protocol, but saw that, you know, everyone thought it was cool, so he's fine. But he's got some other mechanisms, and eventually said, well, you've got the Credit Commons Protocol, but what about the Commons Credit? And this is the sort of thing he does. He just sort of makes a linguistic play and does it, which is actually the premise for a hilarious Stanislav Lem book called The Futurological Congress, where what futurologists do is get up on stage and say, I mashed these two words together and spent a year thinking about what sort of a future that would be if I did that. And they just propose these counterfactual futures. It's a funny book. Anyway, but what he meant by the commons credit is, okay, you've built a credit commons. That's a flow network. Can you get out of that something that will build some commons infrastructure, which will provide credit by the fact that it's infrastructure? You know, a road is a continual credit for getting from A to B, you know, and you can use that because the commons provided it. And so what we know is that mutual credit systems always end up with imbalances. There are always imbalances in the economy. It doesn't net out perfectly. If it did net out perfectly, there would be no energy flows and we'd all be dead. You know, this is not about equilibrium systems. Equilibrium systems are dead systems. We are energy return on energy invested, catalyzing entropy, continually needing flow, needing new investment, new stuff rots. So you have these imbalances, and if you can't resolve them internally, then you try and resolve them through federating into larger contexts, introducing new business partners, new opportunities. But also internally, you can use these balances and you can invest them in commons infrastructure. And these have a different type of credit. This is a credit which is backed by local infrastructure rather than people-to-people promises. So if you can do that, then you can gradually introduce the capacity of the community, not just the trust in the community. And so you need a slightly different mechanism for that because it's a much longer term thing. You're investing rather than just taking promises over a month or 3 months from other economic actors. You're joining together to build something, say a wind turbine. And you still use money instruments, which are basically the same. I mean, Tom and I don't really distinguish. There's just a line which is about how long you trust this instrument for. There are promises, they involve time and trust. And so some promises are, you know, not very hard. You know, if someone here says, oh, I'll play you a song tomorrow, you know, you might not like the song, it might be very short, and maybe they'll just get busy and forget, and you're not going to go and chase them down and say, oh, I hate you, you promised me a song. You're just going to say, oh, that's fine, don't worry. So that's a soft promise, but it's a thing. But also, the Crypto Commons Hub could say, no, your lot are so cool, you have a week for free next year at this time. We will make sure it happens. And that's quite a much harder promise if they made, I'm not begging, you know. There's a building here. You're pretty sure it will still be here. You know, those guys have a business model to operate that building. So they're going to probably have made the building better by next year. They want conferences to go well here, so they'll probably help. So that's a much harder promise that you can trust over a longer period. And that's what you need if you're going to invest in something like a community wind turbine. And rather than just being promised it for free, how about if Credit Commons, if Crypto Commons Hub financed itself by a utility token? It said, this is a day conference voucher. You can buy it now for a slight discount on what you have to pay if you come to book next year. This will give them capital up front to improve the building with, and it will give you an inflation-proof way of paying for your conference day or week next year. And this is what we call a use credit obligation. So on the one hand, if you're it's as simple as a Mars bar voucher. You know, the Mars company have a big factory, they churn out Mars bars, they're not going to give up making Mars bars because that's their business. If there's a Mars bar voucher that you can buy now for 75% of the cost of Mars bars and you happen to like ruining your teeth and your digestion, you might buy 100 of them because, hey, why not? So if you imagine, and this is the housing problem, if you, housing society, if you've got a rent credit obligation, so you've got a token, I mean, we put them in square meters and multiply them by quality, but if you've got a rent token for a house, that's denominated in square meters, not in dollars, then that's your rent paid. So if you can buy that now at a discount, that's going to be useful for your rent in a year. But also an investor, particularly in the case of housing, maybe not so much in the case of the Crypto Commons Hub, sorry guys, but the housing, everybody knows that all the governments in the West run a Ponzi scheme on housing. You know, they do that to buy off the middle classes. Middle class wages haven't risen for 40 years, real wages, but quite often their houses have earned more than they did. And of course, there's a horrible intergenerational cruelty around that. And the system is completely unstable and crazy and dangerous. And, you know, if it goes wrong, what do? They just print a few more $1 trillion and give it to the wrong people. Tomasz can prove this. And those people, because they're the wrong people, they don't pay down debt, they don't invest, they just inflate the asset prices yet further. So we have this, we've used this use credit obligation to invent this thing called the Commons Housing Society, where investors believe that rent will go up forever. So if they can buy a rent token now at a discount, that's a lot less risky than doing a buy-to-let proposition or joining a real estate investment trust. It's just, okay, rents go up steadily. They have done for a long time. Most people, even the people I know who think there's going to be a crash, still say, oh, what happened to my house in 25 years? And I say, Dave, you don't think civilization's going to last 10 years. What are you worrying about your mortgage for? But so, anyway, yeah, the impossibility of death in the mind of someone living. So we think if we can make this happen, and Dave's about to give a house into the Commons in Stroud and accept 25 years worth of rent credits, we think that investors, once they see what these things are, they're a steady, not a super speculative form of investment. If you bought a house, you might well do a lot better, but you also might do a lot worse. If you had, because most people who buy to let, they buy on an interest-only mortgage, so they're not repaying any of the capital. At the end of their 25 years, they've got to sell the property. And if that's in the middle of a housing crash, they're sunk. So it's a high-risk strategy. And if at any point during those 25 years, they have a life event that says, you know, got to do it, and it's in the middle of the crash, also their stuff. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore, but 6 minutes. Okay, well, I'll talk more about the Housing Commons Society, but what I'll do, the method I'll use by that is to see if there are questions about it. Jesse.
When you're uniting people in a network and they form mutual bond of trust, either through having this mutual credit, you're also increasing their market power against people that are not in a network, right? And probably putting consumers, if their businesses, in a disadvantaged position because they can keep prices maybe high, or have like more market power, basically.
So this is quite often, and I'm not even sure that's a critique, but it's quite often leveled as a critique at these models. If you build these commons, they've got boundaries around them. The people inside those commons have built those commons for their material advantage. And, oh, that's terrible. But actually, the model is open source. The pool of availability is large. And everyone can do this. And there's no barrier to that. It's not a tricky problem once you've got the model. So it's sort of like saying, oh, co-ops are just bubbles of safety for people who can get themselves into co-ops. And therefore, co-ops are bad. And actually, I think that's what co-ops are. Mostly it's people banding together to build themselves a little bubble of safety. They tell themselves they're going to change the world, but the co-op movement hasn't changed the world in the last 150 years. So I don't think they're going to. Hans Fohn doesn't agree with me. It's changed the world, apparently. Okay. Well, I wish it would have done it a bit quicker because it's got 10 years to save us all if that's what we're relying on. And I'm not waiting for them. So yes, if there is this idea that if we have a grand universal economy that's perfect, then everyone will be equal and it will be fine. But it's never, ever true. So if you're not building bounded social groups to build social solidarity and mutual wealth amongst themselves, I think this idea of this grand universal fair scheme is, I mean, frankly, it's a big mistake if you think it's true, and it's definitely a lie when it's promoted by statists and people who would say, "Oh, world communism will solve all this." It's just nonsense, in my view. Yeah.
It's related. Tom spoke about strategic gaps in the chain, so it would enable to invest with lower risk. But then the question is the same: how do you make sure that the right people take the data? Because it could be a multinational going in the city and seeing the data and seeing there's a gap, so taking advantage of what you're building.
It's really key. One of the critiques I have of lots of systems, I say, oh, there's particularly distributed systems where it's hard to get information, and we see it in crypto already. There are people setting up to say, oh, we're data aggregators. We can tell you about what's going on. Anywhere you get those sort of lack of information, people want information to find out whether they're paying the right price. It's very often the case. Then someone will come and say, oh, I'm a data aggregator. And in the end, they're going to be something like a bank. That data asymmetry, even if those people have got the best will in the world, they become high priestesses of data, and they begin to see, the network would be so much better if it worked like this, and they begin to be macroeconomists. The key thing, we think, for everything is that every group we build, we propose to the activists, we can't tell them because we build for people, we build with people, is that it should be a mutual owned by all the people involved, and that they own the data, and that data is not, without their permission and not on terms that they don't understand, available to other people. So they have good internal data, and from outside, people just see, again, the Credit Commons Protocol, they see a single balance of trade figure which covers all the complexity inside the member. So inside these networks, data is private.
Thanks. Just to return to Jesse's question, the way I see this is there's in Marxism 101, the wealth of capital has been built through the extraction of the creativity of the people. So it's alienated wealth, alienated power. Whether you believe that's true or not, I mean, I think one of the things that is kind of undeniable is the environmental crisis, the ecological crisis that we're facing, the Anthropocene, the white capitalist scene. I mean, it's got a lot of different names. What that means to me, anyway, is that the structure of risk has been transformed. And in fact, precarity has become something that every being on Earth now has to navigate in one way or another. So I think what's being offered here is the possibility of doing risk management from below, right? So, which is not an imposition necessarily of the particular form by which these networks are produced, but it is sort of a recognition that it's necessary to form new kinds of solidarity networks in order to survive. What are the forms those are going to take? And that is open. This is an open source proposal. I think it's very powerful. One other comment I would want to make on that is that and this is being said already, that the formation of these networks is not just registering what's actually already existing, but it enables a kind of participatory recursivity, which is in fact productive of trust, right? Well, there's basic solidarity, there's basic trust among people, but these networks, if they work, they actually they thicken and give permanence to that trust that has a trajectory. Now, the question I think that's being asked right now is about the credit of what kind of credit can this commons, can the credit commons sort of create? I mean, in the financial architecture, is that credit worthy to create these trust networks that can then draw value out of the existing system in order to continue to financialize these convivial spaces? I mean, if you can basically, we're talking about funding a revolution, which I think is.
Well, I will. I just want to respond first, and then if there is someone who's got a burning point, but yeah, if not, no, you're in. Just to say about that, we are absolutely certain. So whenever we see adverts by pension funds, There's always a clip in it for someone sort of my age. In other words, sort of, older, probably a boomer, probably got some, wealth built up just by their house getting more expensive, nothing they did. And they're concerned. I think there's a huge majority in, simple electoral politics, 51%. We're way past 51% of people in the world who know something needs doing and know it's doing now. They just don't have a feeling of agency as to how to do it. So they do things like ask their pension fund, will my money be doing good? And that's literally the words you hear in these. And the pension funds know, they absolutely know that millions and millions of their customers are really nervous, but can see no other way to just vote for a bit of dignity in their old age, which is not an unreasonable thing to ask for. So we're pretty sure if we can get a few of these commons credit things going, particularly the housing one, that we can approach. There's in the UK, there's a pension firm called Abundance, which is explicitly set up to promote ecologically positive investment. We can get them to put together something called a local investment bond. And I believe that the ability to invest safely in your own community is non-existent in capitalism because whoosh, it's gone. Or small things that people can invest in are very high risk. A local housing co-op. Yeah, these three sort of crazy anarchist squatters want, 10,000 of my money to buy this rundown house that is currently uninhabitable legally. Not sure. I think I'm giving them a present, and people do, but that doesn't scale. But if we can get something that's a local investment bond and it says, okay, you can't invest more than 50% of your money. 50% of the money will be spread over other towns and places, but up to 50% between, dial 20, 50% of your money will be directly invested safely in your community for a steady but not stellar pension scale return. We will unlock billions of dollars, billions. Just, I'm not saying we can do that tomorrow. We've got to prove the model works. We've got to prove that investors believe that rent credits are a safe, stable thing. I had this response to it where someone said, oh, investors won't understand this model. And what? Do they think they understand shares? Have you ever read a share prospectus? Nobody who buys shares understands what the hell they're buying. They're just going with an instrument that other people use. So we have to get through this sort of credibility gap. We have to, and luckily Dave is going to give us a house, which is pretty bloody amazing. We're going to make sure it's safe for him. If we get it wrong, he'll get it back. Is there anyone else who wants to preempt Jesse getting a chance to come back?
Thank you. You're temporarily uniting and giving each other discounts in terms of credit and maybe even better pricing, but you're differentiating price to the rest of the market, therefore disadvantaging the rest of the market, creating your own microeconomy within the wider economy. And if you're grow big enough, you in the end enforce you basically regain power. So it's it's a battle of let's cheat, kind of form a cartel or form right. So why can't we ensure that everyone gets equal benefits and respect prices as they are? Because the markets are already unfair in a way, right? But how can we not go through with that route through regulation, for example, like antitrust laws to break down big corporations, or to ensure that they do certified ecologically responsible production instead of so then the conclusion is of this conference is that so this I understand. So in the scenario where governments are failing and the normal system, we give up hope in normal regulation or in democracy, then we just need to build our own solutions, and that's what we're doing here, right? but democratically, in the sense that it's only advantaging the people that join the exclusive member club early, because if they don't join the exclusive member club of your mutual credit system, then they get disadvantaged by it once it grows bigger, because you don't get the discounts.
Please, and you tell us when we've got to stop. I mean, now.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear the answer. I just wanted to kind of maybe translate in a different, slightly more philosophical perspective what he's saying, because I think I feel the same way in some sense of we want to create something different, but if the medium is the message and even the language like revolutionary funding, I took revolutionary theory, it never ends up better. So how can we ensure through the architecture, through the medium, that we are not repeating the same pattern? So I kind of understand what you're saying. I mean, power and money, and this gets into like Nietzsche and, you know, are humans corruptible because of money? And when they get power, does it change? And why does the meso always get sucked into the macro? So I think that's kind of the point can I reflect that just in a little different language? And I feel that as well. Yeah, I feel that. So I would love to hear how we think this can be solved.
3 words: trust doesn't scale. We can't grow so big that we eat everybody. All we can do is grow many, many, many of these small things, and they can never get big enough to eat everything because they will break down. They don't have the centralized control model that capitalism does. And you know, the number of people in this room to trust is a lot.
I think too, it's the ownership, and there are ways in the architecture to be able to build that in so that it continues to distribute rather than stack.
I trust structures, not architectures.
And is the right to exit. That's the difference. I cannot exit the current system. I can become Pastafarian. I can become whatever. I cannot exit the system. That's why your criticism is a little unfair. And I understand the provocation. I don't want to start a debate. But definitely, because I've built one of those special clubs. Thing is, in reality, it's always groups of disenfranchised people who, if they had a chance to exit the system, they probably would. So it's not like they're getting more competitive because, no. It's like, let's stick together like we're doing here right now. Because all of us alone won't change shit, and maybe all together won't change shit the same way. But we're trying. And if we want to exit, all of us, we're free. And I think that is big and powerful. It's the right to exit.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that. Like social mobility, especially across nation states, like definitely is a thing. One thing I'm very hopeful for, and I feel that we haven't covered here as much as we could maybe, is the search of the AI, because AI could make it possible to not needing to centralize information because of our cognitive limits, and AI assistants can help with having more exceptions, having more trust in people that you don't know by having your AI assistant interact with them instead of having to spend a lot of time in your analysis before trust. So that makes me really hopeful about the future, and I hope you see that potential and we can do a session on it sometime.
Yeah, so, but before that, and this is something I just wanted to share because Matt didn't say it in the morning, that we are establishing a shared protocols working group directly related to that. So we'll hopefully have some proposals to make soon.
Thank you, Exceli, and thank you to Dill and Tom.
I think this is a logistical question. Yeah, very quick.
Yeah, I'm just quick logistical question related to those emerging collaborations. Is there some shared communication tool or space which is going to be used, or is this question going to be addressed? Yeah, okay.
So tomorrow is the day of collaboration, or the collaboration drive in the morning, and I hope we will come out of that with some really concrete steps to go forward. And I hope people won't leave before that happens. It's not on the plan or the agenda or anything, but for somehow Theo is up here, and I've given him 10 minutes, and I'm sure that what he has to say will be worthwhile. The title is...
There's no title. I mean, like,
Okay, and Theo has been working in the University of Vienna and Budapest on statistical modeling for all these kinds of economies. Is that right?
Yeah, I can print it.
Okay. So, without further ado,
Hi. So my name is Teodoro. I'm a PhD student in network science at Central European University. And I'm also coordinator of our research team that we created with Julio and Blanca, and at Freiburg Institute for Basic Income Studies, where this is the name of our research group, Network Analysis Financial Diaries. We decided to choose this name because we think that also digital and quantitative analysis, digital data and quantitative analysis are not enough to understand the world, and especially when we deal with economic networks and analysis of economic networks. So our focus, our main purpose, and the main purpose of my research is actually to develop quantitative impact assessment tools for community and complementary currency systems, because in very short words, actually my story, the reason why I decided to do research on this field is because like exactly 10 years ago, I started to get involved in IGCCR, with the International Journal on Community Currency Research, and then RAMIX, the Research Association on Community and Complementary Currency Research. And so like my story actually started 10 years ago. And it's really nice that when I think it was around 2015, I started to think about, hey, I need a PhD in network science to actually contribute in this field. And now I'm surprised that, shocked that I arrived here and everyone is talking about network science. So I'm very happy about it. But yeah, like, so that's the reason why I decided to do the PhD in network science. And okay, here I think probably someone already talked about RAMIX. If not, this is the website, and we organize BNL conferences. Last year was in Bulgaria, and the next one probably will be in Rome, in Italy. And yeah, and so I will just quickly self-promoting me and my teams. And so like this is the first paper I published with Carolina Metzon and Will Rudik. And it's about the Sarafu dataset, so the blockchain that was used by Sarafu during 2020 and 2021, which is the XDAI. And of course, Sarafu changed a lot in all these years. So this is like a dataset that is we validated and we cleaned, and it's ready to use. There are already university courses that are using this dataset, so it's very useful for simulation if you need. And there are a huge amount of information. We had to categorize all the transactions that happened in the network, especially those disbursements, because partially where the disbursement of Sarafu was given to new subscribers, and partially they tried different kind of reward system. So it's very interesting dataset. The second paper is about circulation of a digital community currency. And here, from the discussion I heard so far, I think it would be a very useful paper. There is a supplementary material where you can find software that is written in Python and R. And basically, like, we try to collect all the analytical tools which can be used to study any kind of community currency system from a quantitative perspective. And yeah, like you find, I worked mostly here on the psychoanalysis, but you can find also, we validated the InfoMap equation, which can be used to for several reasons, but mostly the purpose here is to detect communities, and based on the optimal flow of currency. And it was validated because we already knew here the geographic distribution of the villages. Okay, of the users. And then we had a discussion paper, which we are planning to publish soon in a peer-reviewed paper, in a peer-reviewed journal, and which is modeled in the same principle for community and complementary currency systems, which is more like, I would say, a literature review. We mostly put together all the knowledge about community currency systems so far, and we extended also the design principles that have been discussed in the last 10 years on the field, and especially, maybe I won't. I don't have time to go through the details, but like very nice metrics, how the power is distributed in economic network, and like using in degree and out degree centrality, between centrality, and what are the and then like what is the optimal, let's say, what will be a fourth design principle, which is very trivial, but it's also very interesting to see what are the consequences of it. And so the first three principles that are discussed in the literature are, the first one is closing the forward and backward linkages, which is basically creating cycles. And the second principle is product diversity, and I think was discussed already this morning. The third principle is easy import substitution principle. And of course, like if you want to create a local currency, which is helping to enhance the self-reliance of the local community, you want to substitute import as much as possible, especially for basic needs. And then in the paper, using network science, some basic graph theory, we added the fourth principle, which is basically discussing how it's basically like stating how the value of the available supply needs to be equal to the value of the circulating currency. Either is credit or basic income currency and so on. So, and then, okay, this is a paper I'm co-authoring with Soelo and Julio. This one is about circles UBI. And here the paper is mostly about analyzing structural changes of the network. So basically how an intervention, which was a subsidy program, changed the structure of the network and also the key players and also consumption and production behavior. So we are doing several tests about this. And then another project we are, this is another project we carried out last year. So for 1 year, we collected information from around 400 households, thanks to grassroots economics and the amazing stuff, very patient stuff, because it was really hard. Because these are data that are not coming from blockchain. These are like families that are filling financial diaries every day, what they get, where from whom they're getting money and to whom they're spending. So it was a huge amount of data. You can imagine 600 households, 600, 500 households that are filling financial diaries on a daily basis. And weekly, there were like grassroots staff members that were collecting these diaries. And this was, of course, carried out with other organizations, World Food Program and Kenyan Red Cross. Otherwise, it would be a crazy amount of work. But so the initial purpose of this research project was to compare a simple cash transfer program with cash transfer program provided with vouchers, local vouchers, CIC. And of course, we had a third group of villages as a control group. And basically, of course, as okay, so the main outcome of this was that actually everyone was trading with everyone. So it was really impossible to isolate villages that were supposed to use only cash and villages that were supposed to use only vouchers. So this is what happened at the end. And as you can see, yeah, like basically, I think that the villages you see, the bigger ones are those ones that were treated, but still most of their transaction was going out to other villages. And this is, I think, a very interesting outcome. Also today, someone was talking about this, and because we used to create this, we are using an info map. So you see the different colors. So the info map is an algorithm that is used again for community detection. And thanks to this, we can actually see what are the optimal clusters. So what is the optimal currency area? So like if you are planning to create your own local currency in Kadua, you know that probably you need to involve in the economic network of Kadua also the other villages that are in blue, like Mitani, for example. And I think, and this is like probably what will be one of my next papers is about optimal currency area. So like how you decide to put together villages or what is a community, right? How local is local, and to do this also it's very interesting because like there will be a following up analysis because we know we have comments, right? Like every time a person is buying something from someone else is writing what he's buying, and also there are comments. So like we are planning also to do some text analysis on the financial diaries to see like what is the real need in that cluster, what is missing, what is their supply, eventual net supply of something. And okay, I hope I didn't forget something, but so this is the other project, and yeah, like, okay, this is my other project I'm working on now, which is the relation between multiplier effect and network cycles or network topology. So, and this is half empirical work, half analytical work, because I'm deriving some between 8 to 12 different graph theoretical models where I try to analytically find a solution to calculate the multiplier effect according to different typologies. And yeah, and that's it. Yeah, I'm open for questions. Like you can stop me whenever you want. I'm gonna be here until tomorrow. Yeah.
It's lunchtime now, but we could take a couple of questions. If you want to go to lunch, let's reconvene at 3:30 for a bit more narrative building and then into the open space. Are there any questions for Theo?
When is the optimal currency area start coming out? More or less.
Yeah, I'm thinking, like, I guess, because now I'm giving priority to the multiplier effect paper. So, and we have we have to present this work at Freebies conference, which will be in October, maybe October or November. So yeah, probably next year. Probably I will say yeah, beginning of 2024 probably. Yeah.
Okay, thanks to everyone.
That all looks very exciting. So, I hope your model pretty but satisfied with it. So, yeah.